Or you can pass it to someone who's
here's
dying, so that way
thank you.
not dying or
When you send it to me.
Okay, so my question is super simple because I get this all the time. A lot of people think that Keto S is just for fat loss or weight loss. So can you just simply explain to me some benefits of ketones, because it's always better to hear it from an expert.
The appetite suppression effect that ketones have. So what was the other part of your question? So
Well, just give me some benefits of the ketone. Or
benefits
just
outside.
why, like a lot of people say, why are your girls using it? Because we have 4 girls. And I say, well, it's brain fuel, so that's actually, but just in your own.
Yes, sure. So from a very simplistic point of view, when you pull up to, and maybe I've used this analogy before, when you pull up to the gas station and you have, if you have a car or motorcycle or vehicle that runs on high octane gas, you don't want to put regular gas in it, right? And I think our bodies are really meant to run on like high octane fuel. So when we metabolize ketones for energy, we create less free radicals at the level of the cell, and I think over time that's a very beneficial thing because it actually forces our mitochondria to work better, to work more efficiently. And I think maybe if we start even at an early age and delivering ketones as a source of energy for our bodies, there are many health benefits that can be realized. And we're just at the edge, we're at the cusp of kind of understanding all the different applications. But 10 years ago, when I got into this in 2008, really the only application for the ketogenic diet was pediatric epilepsy. And now you get on PubMed, I mean, there's like 23 or 24 applications. I'll talk about maybe a dozen of them tomorrow in my talk. But 10 years ago, it was only pediatric epilepsy. So as the science is emerging, we're seeing a broad range of disorders that are responsive to nutritional ketosis, things like autism, things like Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Mary Newberg will be talking, and Stephen Cunnane, and that opens up this nutritional regimen, supplementation to a huge, pretty much everybody in some way or another is impacted by cancer, by neurological diseases, or just wants more energy and more, higher performance. So I think that's what's great about this technology is that it really does apply to everyone, and there's so multiple benefits.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm from Australia. I've got a lot of people asking questions. Now, it's not something that I follow myself. I like to stick to a strict ketogenic diet as possible. I'm a chef. A lot of people keep asking because other people are seeing results. Why, after consuming Keto S, some people are still continuing to eat crap foods, high protein, high carbohydrates, and they're still getting the weight loss? Now, I know just from what I've done personal research on your work and what Keto S has done that just ketones just work to elevate everything else. But from your standpoint, why is this working?
Yeah, I do hear that too. I always promote, I'm like a diet guy, so I'm a food guy, so I think the cornerstone of your health should be nutrition, and that we need, and low carb nutrition in particular, not necessarily a ketogenic diet, because that's a pretty restrictive diet to be on. A modified Atkins diet is kind of what I follow, which is a modified version of the ketogenic diet, and then you have paleo and low carb paleo, and I was talking to Mark Sisson the other day, who's a big leader in that. Yeah, we talked for quite a while, and he says undoubtedly he feels the most energy, the most benefits when he's in ketosis. He just can't do it all the time because he just likes to, eat a lot of fruit sometimes or eat this and that. I mean, he always sticks to a pretty strict diet, relatively speaking. But he was so interested in ketones. And that's kind of why he reached out, it's like he wants to be able to get the benefits of ketones. But we've done research in the lab where we give like the standard rodent chow diet, which is a high carbohydrate diet. And when we give ketones kind of as an intragastric bolus, and then we look at things like blood glucose control. Glucose goes down. There's going to be less spikes in glucose, and for reasons that we don't fully understand yet, it affects the neuropharmacology of the brain in a way that it's likely suppressing the appetite, or the appetite control centers of the brain. And it could be doing that through enhancing insulin sensitivity by stabilizing blood glucose levels. If you get a dip in blood glucose without ketones, you're going to get hungry, you're going to get cravings, and you're going to want to eat, overeat actually. And that is largely mitigated or significantly attenuated if you keep your body into ketosis with supplementation. So I think that could be part of the reason why people, still continue to eat whatever they want, crap food, and then take ketone supplementation, and they just have better glycemic control. And if you have better glucose control, you're going to be largely resistant to those postprandial dips in glucose that you get from the insulin surge, and you're less likely to overeat and binge.
Okay, cool. And so lastly, bacon is thrown around these sorts of diets. As, you can eat bacon and you can still have these effects. I've got people asking what the long-term effects of eating a lot of bacon is, or all these the fats around that sort of area.
So saturated fat, is that the question? Well, we know like coconut oil is a saturated fat too, right? I have to say that when I started the ketogenic diet and I did what's known as the classical ketogenic diet, which was about 90 to like 80% fat, my LDL cholesterol, which was the bad cholesterol, sort of went really high. It like doubled, but every marker of metabolic health, like my triglycerides went down paradoxically, my C-reactive protein went down, which is a marker of inflammation. A couple tests, it was undetectable. Where I always had, it was always like 2.2, 2.1, something like that, and it went down. My glucose, my insulin was low. Like every other marker of health improved when I went on a high saturated fat diet, which included a lot of bacon. I have kind of backed off. My wife will tell you I was eating like bacon almost every day, but I've kind of backed off and shifted to eating more fish. I still have a diet that's high in saturated fat, but it's a lot more monounsaturated fats now. All my markers look great still, and they're about the same, but my LDL went down. Now, the question is, and I've talked to the leading experts that study cholesterol and LDL, the question is, what does an elevated LDL and LDL little p, particle size, if that's elevated, is that a bad thing? We don't understand, we don't know the answer to that question, because all the research that has been done looking at the atherogenic effects of elevated LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, has been done in the context of a normal diet. Like no one has actually studied elevated LDL cholesterol on people eating a ketogenic diet. They don't know if it's atherogenic. And if all other biomarkers of metabolic health are okay, I would say it's okay to continue eating bacon. Someone, maybe a little bit cautious and may modify the fatty acid composition of their diet to maybe have less bacon, more monounsaturated fats, and that may lower the LDL cholesterol. But I think the jury's kind of still out. Can I eat massive amounts of bacon? And not everybody who eats huge amounts of animal saturated fats are going to have an elevation in LDL. Some people do. Mine went up and started to creep back down, and then kind of stayed still at an elevated level. And then when I switched my fat intake a little bit, and a little bit less dairy, less heavy cream, less, a little bit less bacon, I still eat almost the same amount of fat, but my bad cholesterol, which the doctors really freak out and write a prescription for a statin if they see that elevated, that has largely went back to normal.
So basically, eat in moderation and don't overdo it.
In moderation, really. Enjoy bacon even every day. Just don't make it. I would limit it to like under a pound a day. Right? and there's bacon. If you shop around, you can get bacon without the preservatives. You can like I even get bacon from, I guess, free-range pigs. I mean, I have sourced out with different companies that they send me products, and I was like, wow, this is really great. And it has like So you can shop around and source out the foods that are without preservatives and and where you kind of have a little bit of an idea of where it comes from.
Cool.
Yeah. I
Thanks
think
for
that's
your time.
important.
Thanks for your time, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're gonna have 2 more questions for Dr. Dom and someone who's not asked a question before to any specialist. So this is one.
Who's the other one?
You and Francisco fighting, Brad.
Francisco, you're out. You already asked a question.
There's a lot of noise going on.
Oh, come on. Who's going to put it on social
Hey
media?
Dom, I'm David Giorgio from Australia. Nice to meet you. Thanks brother. First saw your work on the Swiss and Optum last year. Got me very interested, very intrigued, dealing with ketones. So a couple of questions that I had was, I deal with a lot of high performance athletes. I'm a former athlete myself. And I've got a 2-part question. The first part being caffeinated versus non-caffeinated. So what do you, with the research you've done mitigating the risk of seizures with the Navy SEAL divers, why the caffeine versus the non-caffeine? Nothing to do with the risking of seizures, but yes, just the product. So what does the caffeine do with the beta-hydroxybutyrate that combines that has an effect versus the non-caffeinated? Is there anything like a chemical reaction that happens that makes that more beneficial?
Yeah. So I'm actually a pretty big fan of caffeine. When we study ketones, I can't talk about it completely because I don't have clearance yet, but I'm working to do a project with NASA and a project with the Special Operations community, and I choose to use the Prove It product that does not have caffeine in it, so we can separate the effects of the ketones versus the effects of caffeine, right? Because caffeine can actually, it may not be published yet, but we know that simply by taking caffeine, especially if you're on a ketogenic diet, it can increase your ketone levels. So it mobilizes fatty acids for fuel. Those fats go to the liver, and the liver through beta oxidation can make the ketones. So I actually see ketones and caffeine as working very synergistically together, but as a scientist, I need to study the effects of an independent variable of ketones by themselves. But I think in the pipeline, the experiments that I want to do for performance and even maybe neurological disorders too, because I think the brain can actually be enhanced with caffeine, especially in the presence of ketones, which is another project. And hopefully other scientists listening to this don't jump on this and study it, because I want to study it. But I do think there's remarkable effects of ketones alone. Obviously, it's what I study, but I think there's some synergy there when you combine caffeine and ketones together. And I don't know if Dr. Cunane has talked yet, but he may have some data. I don't know if it's published yet, so I'm not going to say too much, but I know there's evidence out there that if you take caffeine and you're on a ketogenic diet or even with ketone supplementation, it may further augment and increase the level of ketones just through fat oxidation.
Absolutely. So with that then, dealing with high performance athletes and being in that industry, if we're looking at their body composition, and that obviously there's like an optimal body composition and then optimal performance, and you want to be able to juggle them both. You don't want them to be too lean and you don't want them to underperform. So using carbohydrates and using something like a ketone max to enhance performance means that they're working off 2 fuel sources. Would you see this just saying dealing with your high performance athletes, which would be the Navy SEALs, using this as a means to get them an increased performance? Is that?
Yeah, this is a good question. I get this a lot. So I think from my perspective, I'm speculating just based on feedback because we haven't done a controlled study.
Which is fine.
I think it's good to train your body to function off low carbs, right? Not necessarily a ketogenic diet, but maybe a modified Atkins or low carb paleo, whatever you want to call it. And then train your body to use fat and ketones for fuel. And then during game time or the actual kind of event, if it's prolonged especially, to maybe add small amounts of a slow burning carbohydrate to, in addition to ketones. So, but if you completely eliminate carbohydrates from your diet, which is kind of hard to do admittedly, right? So I think you may get into, the body will adapt to that, and the different transport mechanisms and maybe enzymes like pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, PDH, that's kind of like the gatekeeper to your carbohydrate metabolism. But if you just keep in 50 grams of carbs a day, that enzyme stays relatively active. So if you dump in 100 or 150 during an event, you're going to use those probably a little bit more efficiently. So, so my recommendation is to train low carb, and during game day or the time where you need peak performance, to throw in small amounts of carbohydrates during that time.
I've got a million more questions, but I'll leave you to it. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
One more.
Last question. Hey guys, I'm here in Tampa, Florida with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, top researcher in the field of ketogenics. So I have one question for you. As far as some of the other ketogenic companies coming out, why do you choose to prove it? And why would somebody take our exogenous ketone products versus another brand?
Yeah, a good question. There are a lot of companies coming out on the market. I think like every day I get at least one or two companies, it seems like, that want to get into this space. Prove It was really the company, they came in early, so that's one thing, right? But they were the company that kind of really responded to my feedback, because I said that the community at large, especially the distributors, the people selling the product, they really need to hear the science behind the product, and academic people need to come in and talk, and Brian was extremely receptive to my kind of comments on that, and really changed the whole landscape of, I guess what he's calling community-based marketing, which is really getting a family of people together that can support one another, and they're not only selling a product, but I think more importantly from my perspective, being in academia, they're educating the public. So, as for me, I can only educate so many people. Like I do my teaching at the university and I jump on podcasts here and there, but if we can, it can grow exponentially, right? Because if you guys, all you guys get educated on the science and all the different applications of this, you're a much better communicator of the science of ketones, and you're just going to spark the interest of the public at large. And that's the difference between Prove It and other companies. And their product too is the only product that I know that's third-party tested, right? So if I'm going to use the product for work we're doing now with NASA or the special operations community, I'm going to gravitate towards using a product that has third-party testing and that has kind of like the standards, the quality control behind it. So that's some of the reasons for it.
Awesome, man. All right, Dr. Dom, if you guys haven't read Tools of the Titans by Tim Ferriss, go pick it up.
Who does the third-party testing? Just a quick question.
Well, there's like different agencies that do that. There's NSF and I think Informed Choice.
I don't know them all, but just wondering which one does it.
Informed Choice is, I think, the one, and I know Brian's going to do NSF too. So if they have multiple third-party testing, that's like really good. And it's impossible from my end to get an IRB, the ethics community, to even approve it for human use, especially in like astronauts without third-party testing. And I commend Brian and Prove It for doing that.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate
it. Ketones and ketosis. Folks, do you want, after hearing that, you probably want to try exogenous ketones, right? So if you do, type interested in a 5-day experience below. We can get them out to you, and you can try what he was just talking about, because most of that talk was it was about ketones, but also about an easier way to get into that state. So have an awesome night.
Couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I won't.